Okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our what we've been using to do status and trend monitoring of streams in Washington State, and kind of some of the issues we've been running into, and Chad will get into how we're moving forward from our issues. So if you want more background, this is the home page of the Department of Ecology. You put in watershed health monitors, the page there, or there's a tiny URL down at the bottom as well. So our monitoring program began in 2009 as a result of designed around a quality assurance monitoring plan, where we got guidance from a forum of resource agencies in the state that gave us guidance, and we also had a series of workshops with planning that included federal agencies, local stakeholders, private citizens, family recovery groups, and we used their guidance to develop the plan. And the idea was to we were given the guidance to come up with a EMAP type design built on what the EPA has been doing, and to have a multi-scale approach where the Department of Ecology could monitor at the statewide scale and at broad regions, in this case, mostly salmon recovery regions, and then, but also provide context for methods and the database and framework so that local groups, watersheds and things like that could use the same system to plug in and have some comparability. So our goal was to help address a couple of mandates of the Clean Water Act, especially describing waters of the state, the 305B section of the Clean Water Act, but also to address issues regarding the Endangered Species Act for salmonid fishes. Most of Washington State has a listing of one kind or another or salmonid, and we have a state law that requires report on the state of the salmon every 2 years. We were intending to feed that report. So based on our stakeholder input and whatnot, there's a lot of requirements that came out of what we were designing. It was pretty clear that we needed a frame that was at 1 to 24,000 scale, so that locals could plug in. We wanted to, of course, be statewide, but we didn't really talk about going beyond the state at that point. Maybe we should have. It was pretty general interest in having a spacing at about 1 kilometer apart of our sample. Because we were trying to mimic the EMAP design, we wanted stroller order, and now the frame that we had at that point in time really wasn't, for Washington State, it really wasn't a 1 to 24 hydrography at that time that had stroller stream order that we could use. Based on our experience with the EPA's EMAP, the national approach at that time, we kind of found that they were using 100,000 hydrography, the NHD plus, I guess. I'm not sure what it was called in those days, but between that and a limitation of 50 sites per the state, it wasn't really, we were getting a lot of criticism that our sample was kind of biased towards mountains and public lands, and you see a lot of our points were in public lands. And our work groups were kind of more intent on us being able to describe conditions that the state could, state policies could address with management. So, namely, state lands or private lands, and asking us to kind of leave the monitoring of federal lands to federal agencies, and so we moved that way. So this is the original master sample that we came up with the help of Tony Olson and others at EPA. It uses the Washington Department of Natural Resources hydrography from 2005. There's 387,000 points on it, and so that's much I want to say about that slide. But like I was saying, we want to avoid federal lands and leave that kind of monitoring to others, ILO and AREM kinds of things. And so that map to the left is kind of what we've been a result of our monitoring presently. And it looks like, you know, the spatial distribution might not look so good, but if you take away federal and tribal lands, it's really not so bad. So problems with the first master sample was built on non-standard hydrography. There's variable density issues. There's some slight gap in coverage, not really a big deal on that one. But and probably the biggest thing is that we've had to pull up several hydrography layers to work through evaluating our sites for whether or not they're met our target or not. Part of that is because there was no strawler on that hydrography that we were using, and so then the master sample we came up with also doesn't have an attribute for describing perennial or not, so that's kind of a manual assessment we have to do whenever we run through our evaluating the sites for target or not. Because what we're after is perennial streams that are naturally flowing, unidirectional, don't occur in a canal or a ditch, and we wanted to spread the size across various. We didn't want to bias our sample to just the kind of headwaters, so we're trying to spread things out. That was the reason for using the Strahler order to allocate our size selection. And so the last issue is that it's confined to Washington. So if we want to collaborate with other neighboring states or people in British Columbia or whatnot, we can't really do that with the sample we've got, unless we do some statistical trickery or whatever. So the first issue, variable density, the hydrography was drawn by a timber management agency, and so they put more emphasis in places where they expected timber sales to occur. And so, I mean, you can look in certain places, even within a county, and it's pretty obvious where there's differences in how dense the lines are drawn. So another issue is that there's a small gap in coverage. The units units that were used to draw the master sample, they're based on counties on the west side of the state and watersheds on the east, and a certain small part they don't meet. So this part between the Klickitat drainage and Skamania County where it's not represented. It's federal land, so it doesn't really affect what we're doing. But, so when we go through our site evaluations, looking at each random site on the map and evaluate. So I have to explain. We look at, we try to allocate straw water, 20% of our sample into each of 5 size classes. And because there's no straw water on our sample frame, we use this sample, the straw water that appears on the 100,000 NHD plus hydrography. And so if our sample frame lines up with that NHD plus, then we use the straw water that has it. If the sample point falls higher up in the drainage, then that NHD plus gets assigned the straw water 0. And that really has to be done point by point, kind of manually look at both streams and compare, make sure that they match in geometry and figure out where the point actually lays. So, for instance, so then the other thing is we have to make sure that 1 to 24,000 Washington Department of Natural Resources set of streams, the point that's selected from that set of streams, we need to make sure that it falls on the Department of Ecology's hydrography, which was the basis of what the NHD layer is now. So that's 3 stream layers we have to look at all our sites, which is really cumbersome. With that, comparing the different layers, sometimes we get our locations wrong, and or a point might be falling on the frame, but it really doesn't line up with the state layer. And it might not always be so obvious until you zoom in really close. So the effects of using multiple layers, one, our inferences are based on our site evaluations. So, like I said, we have to do it manually. So we're looking at hundreds of candidate sites that we go through until we have about 50 sites. We try to get 50 sites to sample, as opposed to if we had a strawler that was part of the master sample, we could just do that automated for the 300 and some thousand points. And it's kind of hard to do, so time and effort is the big thing too, and it's also hard to explain to people. And like on the previous picture I was showing you, sometimes there's a handful of sites where we think we're sampling a random site. It ends up not actually being part of the sample frame, so we have to take it off our random set. It just becomes a site without a adjusted spatial weight. So another big issue is that, like I say, it ends at the borders. I know like we were to collaborate with folks in the Lower Columbia to do an assessment down there. Another set of, another sample would have to be used. So, we have interests that cross the borders, including like mulch trout or salmon. So I guess I think this is where you take over, isn't it, Chad?
Okay, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the challenges that we face using the current master sample list that we have. Some of the challenges with that, but I also think it's important to try to talk about some of the things that we've been able to gain by using that master sample. So that is, gaining some inferences based on this spatially balanced random sample, even though it's excluding federal land as well as tribal land. But what we're able to get from that is some of the things that people are looking for. What is the status of trend? What is the status of, condition, stream condition in the state? To this point, we really didn't have a very good estimate. We could use some federal data, but as I mentioned, that's pretty limited in the number of sample size. estimated the extent of condition, whether that's good, fair, poor, of biological condition, as well as other types of variables that we might be interested in. So status, extent, then also to be able to, we're collecting a lot of data when we're going to these sites, ranging from habitat to water chemistry, in situ sediments, all these different things, biological data, be able to start looking at stressor identification. And then, since we are going back to these sites, going to regions from time to time, we're able to start examining trends. Even though this started in 2009, we've been to some of the regions multiple times, and so we're able to start looking at things change from the first time period that we went there to the next. So I'll go through some of that. So to answer that first sort of question, now we're able to put in a number to what is the percent of streams, proportion of streams in Washington that are good, fair, poor. So this, which one is this? There we go. There we go. Okay, so now we can actually, if we look at all streams in Washington, we can see the stream kilometers that were assessed. You say that about 33-34% of the stream kilometers that were assessed were in poor biological condition. And this is using the multi-metric index, the benthic index of biotic integrity developed by CAR. And this is the first time we've been able to look at the BIBI across the state. It's been examined a lot in the Puget Sound. Now we can actually say that about using the BIBI, about 34% of streams in our sample frame, which was non-federal and non-tribal lands, are in poor biological condition. And we can start even breaking that up into kind of more regional trends. So if you look at Western Washington versus Eastern or the Columbia Plateau is very different than the rest of Washington. We can look and see that there were, we didn't assess as many kilometers there, but approximately 46% of streams in the Columbia Plateau are considered in poor biological condition. And because we're using the GRIS 90, we've got confidence intervals. These are 95% confidence intervals there. And we've been in Western Washington, 32%, Eastern 34%. So we start attaching numbers to what is the trend overall, and then at different regions. And then we can go to even finer levels. We can look at, in the Puget Sound itself, about 45% of the stream kilometers that were assessed are in poor biological condition. And unlisted region of Washington, about 49, 50%. We can start looking at trends at a regional level. And, this is using the watershed health monitoring database. Now there's other regional monitoring that's gone on in the Puget Sound. We see that with, the watershed health, about 45% of streams were in poor biological condition. In 2015, a regional stormwater action monitoring project went through the Puget Sound and found that it was a little bit different because they were looking inside and outside the UGA, and it's looking, inside urban kind of areas. And we found in that data set it was about 82, I believe, 82% of streams were in poor biological condition. Okay, here we've got, spread across a larger region, and we weren't focused on inside and outside the UGA. So just because of the way the urban environment is, it's spatially clumped, we were able to estimate about 45%, but when you start targeting it towards an urban sort of signal, it's much higher. So you might actually be underestimating, kind of biological impairment in this region. But it's now giving us an opportunity to be able to assign values in different regions to be able to assess what's going on at the statewide level and at these various spatial levels. And we're also able to look at, because we're also collecting other types of data, what is the extent of impairment in different parts of the state? And what we see is we're collecting habitat, substrates. What we got here is the extent of poor condition across the state. What we see is that log relative bed stability, percent sand fine, those are the two stressors that have the highest extent in the state. We see that over 75% of streams that were assessed had poor scores for log relative bed stability. And we can also rank those and see, okay, substrate is definitely an issue in the state. We also have problems with nutrients, dissolved oxygen. We have some other substrates, average substrate size, embeddedness. Here's our BIBI, so our benthic index of biotic integrity. And we can look and see what other sort of stressors are occurring across the landscape in the state. You see that lead had one sample that was that came up with poor conditions. This is lead measured in the we're able to look at what's the kind of the extent of stressors in the landscape, and we can start doing stressor ID, right? Analyses like relative risk, attributable risk. And so, using conditional probabilities to see, when we have certain types of stressors, how often does that lead to poor biological conditions? So, we're looking at the BIVI. Here we're able to say that if we have poor percent sand fine, so elevated percent sand fine, we have a greater than 4 times greater risk of having poor BIVI scores associated. So the probability of BIVI scores is 4 times greater when you have elevated percent sand fine. Okay, now these that are in light are statistically significant. Okay, because the error bars don't cross 1. And so we can start seeing, okay, what are the stresses that are having impact here? We see that lead, when we do have poor lead in the sediment, that have a higher probability of having poor BIVI scores. As you remember, only one site in all the data that we had an elevated copper lead level, and so that's what the attributable risk here. It's nice because it takes into account the extent of the stressor and then the relative risk. And what we see here is that in terms of lead here, it doesn't really, when it occurs, it can definitely be a problem, but it's not a general problem, at least in the data set that we have. What we can see here is that basically the top 4 stressors here were percent sand fine, log relative bed stability, average substrate size, and embeddedness. And basically we interpret this as percent sand fine. If we were able to reduce elevated percent sand fine at sites to get them from being not poor, it would improve BIVI scores by about 60%. So we interpret that as, we would improve our poor BIVI scores by 60% if we reduce percent sand fine. Okay, that takes into a lot of assumptions with this sort of analysis, but what it starts to do is it starts to help us to focus, okay, where if we want to have the biggest bang for our buck in terms of trying to improve conditions, where can we focus our efforts on? And what we see here is that if we focus on kind of the substrate, well, that's what's impacting the macroinvertebrates, which is not all too unsurprising because that's where they live, right? I have to caveat this also with the fact that we, in this analysis here, we use just local variables, or what we were measuring at the stream reach. Okay, now we're not taking into account what's going on at the landscape level. That would be kind of a separate analysis. It'd be nice to be able to see how much is weighted towards local processes versus things occurring on the landscape. But at least at the local stream reach process, if we can focus on improving substrate, okay, also canopy cover was a big thing, nutrients, those are the things that if we can at least, all the different types of stressors going on in the landscape, if we can focus on some of these sort of things, that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of improving biological conditions. Okay, so that's kind of some of the things that we've been able to do with the data. Now, another thing that we can do since we've been through some of the regions more than once is just show some of the trends that we can start examining. So this is like in the Puget Sound. You see that the first time that we visited there, here's a PDF of that. And then here's the second time that we visited in 2013. What we see is that there was a statistically significant difference between the 2 time periods. In a sense, it got slightly better in the Puget Sound. Now the question is that a trend or was that just random noise? Now, the third time we go through here, we'll be able to kind of see, is it continuing a trend or is it just kind of random noise? Things change or not? Okay, and here we can see that in different parts of the state where we've been through multiple times, here there was really no difference. In the Coast Range, there was no difference from the first time period to the second. There actually was in the lower Columbia, and it tends to be in the lower end of that BIVI scale. And then in the mid-Columbia, it was just marginal. But we're now able to start saying, okay, we've been to these regions once, we can establish what the status is, and as we go to these regions more than once, are things getting better or are they getting worse? Or are they not changing at all? So that's the sort of things that we've been able to start doing with this data set, but because of the reasons that Glenn mentioned before, when we sample when we're trying to find the sites that we're going to sample, there's a lot of evaluation that has to go through because some of the attributes that we're interested in, which is Strahler order, was not in the master sample. So we weren't able to evaluate all the master sample points in a region. You only have to focus on a 1,000, there might be 30,000 points in that region, but you're only able to evaluate maybe 1,000. So you're making inferences about what's going on in that population of sites based on a small subsample, so subsampling and subsampling. So I'm going to talk about kind of what we're trying to do now in terms of working towards a new master sample, designing it that will hopefully be a little bit easier for us on the front end, which is site evaluation, but also on the back end, adjusted spatial weights, all these sort of things that go into the analysis. We're hoping that it will make it less cumbersome in that aspect and help with all the other aspects. So essentially, we're rebuilding from the stream up, and we're using the NHD 1 to 24,000. And essentially, we're subsetting anything that's stream or river, as well as artificial path. First time I went through this, didn't realize that there's a lot of streams that are actually artificial paths. So I'll show you that in a second. But, another thing is that these points lie directly on the NHD flow line, so now we're able to get NHD attributes right into the master sample. Okay, so here's the state of Washington. Here are the 73 HUC-8 regions that encompass Washington. It would have been nice to have just taken region 17 and done the NHD flow lines and done all the master sample points that way, but it's just, the file's just way too big, at least for my computer to handle. So essentially what we had to do is basically break it down into all the different HUC-8 regions and then basically pull them together. So kind of show that. It's probably not the best color. You can see right here is region 1711. Okay, the HUC for region 1711. It shows the 21 HUC-8 regions. So doing each HUC-8 individually and then compiling those HUC-8s together and then re-randomizing is essentially the process. So here's the Puget Sound region. We can see the coastline in blue, the NHD artificial path in red, and then we got the streamline in gray. What we see here is, you know, because it's on the NHD flow line, we're able to get some of the attributes that we're interested in, okay, which is there are some stream river points or you know, flow line areas that have no attributes, but a lot of them do. So you can tell whether or not, as Glenn mentioned, part of our target is perennial stream. Okay, so once we have these master sample points, we can focus on just the perennial streams. Okay, but this master sample will also have all these other attributes, so if somebody's interested in non-perennial streams, you can also use the master sample list. Okay, and so this just shows the different parts of the NHD flow line that we were interested in. Okay, and this is all the points once they regenerate the master sample points. In this case, there were 4,808 stream kilometers in this region, which resulted in 4,808 sample points. So this is at 1 kilometer increment. Here's another region, Lake Washington. Okay, we see everything in red is the artificial path. Here we have Lake Washington, right in here. Okay, but not including those artificial paths would be a lot of these other kind of potential stream areas out of the mix. And once you generate the master sample points, we end up with 3,096 stream kilometers, which results in 3,096 points. Okay, put all those together, and we end up with 28 HUC-8 regions, 114,482 points. You can see we've even got Canada. Points to run into Canada there. Okay, so 15,100, or actually 16,000 points lie in Canada. 98,000 of those are in Washington. Now we have an accounting of all these different points, where they are, and some information associated with them. How many of them are perennial? How many are non-perennial? Those sort of things. And so essentially what we have now is these master sample points that we can now join information. So we can get all the NHD information. We can add other attributes that might be of interest to us, such as level 3 ecoregion, level 2, level 4, whatever you want. County, HUC 2 to HUC 12 values, so you can subset this data set to whatever kind of scale you're kind of interested in. We also have stream order, which is one of the strata that we're interested in sampling. Okay, you can also add urban growth boundaries. And an important sort of thing that was kind of brought up earlier in terms of the analysis, you can join this with Streamcast. So we have the COM IDs that we can join to every single master sample point has a COM ID that can now be associated with the StreamCat data set, which includes the index of catchment integrity or the index of watershed integrity. And so we can start to see what, so using this StreamCat data that was generated essentially for the national data set, but using it to join to our data set as well. So you can join a lot of other things as well to this master sample list that we didn't have before to help us evaluate in different ways. So here are those master sample points again, and so now we have several groups that are interested in using this. As I mentioned, in 2015, there was a stormwater action monitoring sample that went through the region. Okay, they want to join their new master sample list to what we've done, and so this area in blue here are the points that would be the stormwater action monitoring that will take place starting in 2020. Okay, so other groups are sort of interested in using this. The city of Bothell has also expressed interest in using this, and we expect that others in the future will as well. But, which leads us to kind of, why did we do this? We're hoping that some of the benefits will be hopefully that we now spend less time at the desktop doing site verification, GIS work, because we'll have a lot of that really handy, easily accessible. Okay, we're hoping that we'll be more efficient calculation of adjusted spatial weight. So the actual selecting of the points and adjusted spatial weights will be a lot easier than what we were having to do before. Okay, hopefully it's a little bit easier to explain, and this is a more recent framework. As Glenn mentioned before, we didn't have all these attributes associated with the DNR layer. Well, with NHD, that's basically the gold standard for streams in Washington and in the United States. So we now have access to that information with this master sample. Okay, which then also leads to some of the challenges and questions that we have. We'll have been through the state twice when we no longer will be using the old master sample list. Okay, we'll move to the new master sample list. So then it becomes, well, some of the challenges might be, how do we compare the old versus the new data? It's easier at kind of a broad scale, but when we start getting to a little bit finer sort of things, it becomes a little bit more challenging. Okay, also, some of the frame attributes aren't necessarily intuitive, like artificial path to me means, that's why I didn't include it originally, because I thought, well, that's artificial, so it's not really, it wasn't until we were in one of the regions, the whole rainforest, that we found that the Salt Duck River was completely missing there. How is that the case? Well, it's an artificial path. It doesn't seem artificial to me because it's in the rainforest, but hey, that's part of the NHD attributes. With that, I'm done, but we have some kind of questions if we have any time to kind of to have put before the group.